Hi, welcome to Tonnau Talks, and today we're going to be talking with Dr. Catherine Edwards about sexuality and gender identity. I'm Dr. Keris Rees, Senior Specialist Lead Educational Psychologist for Neath Talbot Local Authority. And as you can see on our screen there, we've got a QR code. So please, for those of you who are watching on YouTube, please use this QR code to be able to access our live sessions. We do have parents from Neath Talbot who are joining us live as this is being recorded, and we're hoping that they will have some questions for us for Catherine to ask later. Anyway, thank you for joining us today, Catherine. First and foremost, I'd like to ask you, how did you become interested in this topic?
Well, thank you for having me today. Well, importantly, I think I should mention here that I am a cisgendered heterosexual. So this just means I identify with the gender I was born with, and my sexual orientation is straight, so I'm attracted to men. Therefore, I'm not here to kind of tell people how others should feel who might not feel the same way. Today, I hope to just kind of share some research to inform evidence-based best practice.
Can I just ask that you mentioned you're cisgendered heterosexual, you're female, yeah? So would a male who was born a male, who's also interested in women, be cisgendered heterosexual?
Yes, yeah, that's correct.
Because this is a new term that obviously, me being from a child of the 80s, we never had these back then. So it's interesting to hear how they're being used now. So it is something that I have heard, but it's nice to just clarify that for our listeners.
Yeah, and I think it's important to clarify these things because I think when you kind of get used to using these terms, it can be hard to forget that others don't. So thank you.
Yeah.
But in terms of your question, I suppose I'm just really fortunate to have grown up with kind of various members of the LGBTQ plus community in terms of family and friends. Therefore, it has been kind of an everyday part of my life. However, since kind of graduating my undergraduate degree and starting what I like to call like the real world, I've noticed that this is a privilege that not many people have experienced. And I've noticed that perhaps some individuals need support in understanding terms like we just talked about and asking questions in order to kind of feel comfortable with this kind of topic. Humans are curious creatures by nature. And if you've not experienced things, then it can be hard to understand them. Therefore, I helped to kind of deliver gender identity training within a previous local authority alongside Dr. Rhiannon Warwick, and have since created a sexuality training off the bat of the gender identity training, as it was something people kind of wanted more support with. And this is absolutely not to say I'm perfect, as like many of us, I have and will inevitably make some mistakes as I learn. But I recognise that I'm in a really kind of privileged and wonderful position where I can use the aspects I've learned along the years to help others.
And I think this is really important because, as I said, from my generation especially, there's a lot of new terms that come out and like a lot of, mindsets have changed, which is a really good thing. I obviously respect that. And I think you're going to have lots of questions from me today about clarifying different things. So I think this is going to be a really helpful topic for our parents listening as well, because as we know, like the climate changes and it should change because there's a lot of misunderstandings out there, and I think a lot of people are afraid to make a mistake asking certain questions. So I think that's why it was really good for us to get you on board today, because I think it's helpful for us to have these open and frank conversations about the different terminologies, what it means for people, and how we can support our kids who need some extra support with this, because ultimately we want our children to be happy and healthy, and this is a topic that is really important for us to discuss.
Absolutely.
One of the things, obviously we're talking about sexuality and gender identity. What's the difference? What do you mean by sexuality? What do we mean about that? Because I hear things like, polyamory, for example. Can you explain that?
Yeah, of course. So sexuality simply means who you're attracted to sexually, whether that be men, women, both, or neither. Polyamory comes under kind of sexuality, but isn't really part of the LGBTQ plus kind of community. And
Okay.
it just is a non-monogamous approach to love and dating in which people are consensually involved with more than one person at a time. So it sounds kind of complex, but when you dig into it, it's not that deep.
Okay, so in terms of sexuality then, so what are the differences there? So I know we've got obviously got you mentioned about being heterosexual, we've got homosexuality, bisexuality. Are there other terms that we should be aware of?
Yeah, so there's quite a few. So if we go into what LGBT kind of QIA plus stands for, that might help us a little bit in understanding. So it stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, asexual, and then others.
Okay.
So in terms of sexuality, it would be the lesbian. So that means a woman who is attracted to women. And some non-binary people may also identify with this term. Gay means a man who's attracted to men, and some non-binary people also identify with this term. Bisexual, or just simply bi, is what some people know it as, is someone who is attracted to more than one gender. Then we've got queer, which is a term used by those wanting to kind of reject specific labels of sexual orientation and or gender identity. It can also be a way of rejecting the perceived norms of the LGBTQ plus community. However, it's really kind of important to be mindful here that the term was historically used as a slur and is still viewed as such by some LGBTQ plus people. However, others have reclaimed it and now embrace the term.
Okay, so we've heard a lot of the terms such as the LGBT. We've also have heard about LGBTQ plus IA. Is that right?
Usually we say LGBTQIA plus, but that works as well. We've talked about the Q, so that's the queer, as we
Yeah.
mentioned earlier. Then we've got the I, so that's intersex, and it describes a variety of natural bodily variations that don't fit into the binary. So, for example, you're born with both genitals or the chromosomes are mixed. And then A stands for asexual, so it means a person who does not experience sexual attraction.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you. That's interesting.
We've also got other kind of terms that may be kind of not as well known, but you may come across them or our parents might. So there's terms such as kind of gender fluid.
Okay.
So gender is on a spectrum, as I've discussed earlier, and how we express our gender kind of changes. So you may feel or express more male one day and more female on another day. Before we kind of discuss the non-binary and or gender non-conforming, I think it's important to mention once again what binary actually means. So binary is the classification of gender into two distinct forms, masculine and feminine even. Binary assumes that people are one or the other category. Therefore, non-binary or gender non-conforming refers to gender as a more fluid concept than the binary kind of male-female. They don't feel that they kind of fit into one or the other category, and they may prefer the pronouns they, them, or their.
Okay.
Cisgender is, as we've described a little bit above, is someone whose gender identity is the same as the sex they were assigned at birth. So some people also say non-trans. Genderqueer, this term has been reclaimed by those that identify as something other than cisgender. Demisexual is an umbrella term used to describe people who may only feel sexually or romantically attracted to people with whom they have formed an emotional bond. People may also use terms such as gay, bi, lesbian, straight, and queer in conjunction with demi to explain the direction of romantic or sexual attraction as they experience it. Pansexual refers to a person whose attraction towards others doesn't regard sex and or gender. Heterosexual then simply refers to a man who is attracted to a woman or a woman who is attracted to men. What's important to mention here, I think, is that Stonewall have an extensive list of LGBTQ plus terms. So if you kind of find one and you want to know the definition of it, that's where I'd go.
Okay, so what's Stonewall?
It's a website. So if you put in Stonewall terms, LGBTQ+, it'll come up with all the kind of vocabulary and things like that. Snowmall itself is a charity that is part of the LGBTQ+ community.
Okay. That's really helpful to be able to go to and find out a lot more.
There'll be a link in the description below, I believe.
Yeah, because I've noticed that recently. So obviously there's a lot of terms there you mentioned that would be used as slurs and quite negative. And again, they're now kind of being used as more terms of identity, So you can understand it's difficult for some people to know when something is used as a slur or it's used as that identity. And I think it's been okay with knowing that to ask to if you got it right,
I think
isn't
that's
it?
important because, as you say, there are some reclaimed terms. Personally, I would never use these reclaimed terms, bar for an educational purpose.
Yeah.
Outside because I'm not part of the LGBTQ+ community. However, I think it's just being kind of open and inquisitive. So it's asking those questions, not in a harmful way of just remaining curious with individuals. If there's a word that you're not quite sure if you can use, it's always just better to ask.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And can you tell us a little bit more about what we mean by gender identity then?
Yeah, so gender identity concerns your internal sense of self. So it's male, female, neither or both, and how you choose to express yourself. So gender and kind of sexuality is a social construct, which means that it's an idea that's been created and accepted by the people in a society. Therefore, different societies might understand kind of gender in this case differently. For example, in the UK, we typically see gender as a binary, so male or female, which has an impact on the way we behave. Yet in different cultures, they have different approaches, such as in Oaxaca, Mexico, they have a third gender known as the Muxes, who are usually men who identify more as women. It also applies to individuals who don't fall into the traditional male, female, or homosexual, heterosexual characteristics as well. And the Indigenous people from this area do not view gender as that binary concept. Therefore, it's easy to see why we can become stuck despite gender actually being a spectrum. Furthermore, gender identity and sexual orientation are quite varied in themselves and complex, and they may change over time as well.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people do see gender as you're either male or you're female. It's more kind of that biological thing. And I think that's important for us to notice that it's an identity.
Absolutely.
It's what they identify as. And, it's interesting about, you were mentioning in Mexico, how it's seen, differently and it's not seen as a bad thing.
No.
And I think that's what we kind of worry about, isn't it? In that sense, some cultures, and especially in the UK, as we find, it's something that some people find very difficult to understand.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's just, as I say, it's the way we're brought up. So we do think in this binary kind of concept. So it's really hard for us to kind of have an individual that doesn't fit into boxes. We like labels, we like boxes.
Yeah.
We feel safer.
Yeah.
So when a person doesn't quite fit into what we kind of perceive to be man or woman, that can make us feel scared.
Yeah.
And it's just about kind of being open, being curious, as I've said, in terms of finding out kind of more around this topic. So we can
Absolutely. And that's the key, isn't it? It's about being open to think, okay, this is new to me. I don't understand it, so I need to find out more rather than it being rejecting of it. I think that's important, isn't it? Okay, I was just wondering as well, in terms of, some of the things that we've talked about. Obviously, when I was younger, terms like queer were used as, quite insulting in a way. And now we're hearing it more now, especially in social media. I'm just wondering, currently, are there any phrases that we, could be using that might be quite, upsetting and, quite derogatory to people?
That's a really good question, to be honest, as I don't think we realise how much we actually use gender-specific terms as our everyday language. And I'm going to focus on the gender-specific terms, as I believe they tend to be the main obstacle for individuals that they may not realise they're using. So I know we've talked about kind of queer and that kind of thing, but I think because of historical issues with those, we're more aware of them. Whereas with the kind of the gender aspects, I think it's just part of our everyday life. So we might not be aware that they can be harmful. So, for example, I like you to think about how you would kind of separate groups out, how you would refer to a group of individuals. If we've got any teachers listening, I'd like you to think about how you greet a class in the morning or how you kind of say goodbye to a class. And I bet some of you use the terms such as boys and girls, ladies and gents, and or guys, but guys specifically sometimes, because I feel like people think that's a gender neutral term when it's not.
Yeah.
Instead, it might just be better to use words such as folks, individuals. If you're in a school, it might be using words such as students, pupils, or the year group that the individuals are in. And then we take all that kind of gender language out of the conversation then.
And it's interesting there, thinking in terms of the question I was asking, exploring it in terms of sexuality, but actually to be mindful that there's a gender specific way of being quite insulting in a way to categorize people as simply being boys and girls, ladies and gents, and I think that's really mindful for teachers, as you're saying, in schools. I went to a school where I had a boys' entrance and a girls' entrance, in stone above it. And, we still have boys and girls schools, don't we? And yeah, it's interesting to be mindful about how we do address people.
Yeah, and I think it comes back to that binary concept again.
Yeah.
We like to label, labels make us safe. So having these labels, we just don't naturally think about it. But I think when you kind of working in this kind of area, that's when you start noticing these things a little bit more.
Yeah, and I think that's something I've noticed, across the years of, there has been certainly a shift, isn't there? And I've, why is it suddenly a thing now?
Okay, that's interesting as well. So with the advance in technology and social media, this has simply meant that information is more easily obtainable, and it provides a platform for these kind of discussions to be shared in a wider fashion than what was previously available. It also helps that recently laws have changed, such as same-sex couples are now allowed to get married in the UK. So this has been since 2014 for England, Wales and Scotland, and 2020 for Northern Ireland. However, LGBTQ plus history dates back to the first recorded instances of kind of same-sex love, diverse gender identities and sexualities, which were noted in ancient civilizations.
Okay. Do you have any examples of these, Catherine?
Absolutely. So one of the earliest discovered references to homosexuality in South Asia comes from a Hindu medical journal written in 600 BCE, which describes the concept of homosexuality and transsexuality in a neutral manner. Furthermore, as early as the 8th century BC, the ancient lawmaker Philolaus of Corinth, who himself had a male lover, created laws in support of same-sex male unions. By the 7th century BC, there was at least 5 different varieties of same-sex relations in ancient Greece, and the sacred band of Thebes was an elite military unit comprised of 300 male lovers in the 4th century BC, who courageously ended Spartan domination. And millennia after, writers, philosophers, and other individuals were busy contemplating same-sex love, and many vessels and statues on display in museums illustrate aspects of homosexuality in ancient Greece. So there's quite a lot around, and it's not just kind of concentrated within Southeast Asia, it's in Greece, it's in basically everywhere.
Yeah.
I think it's more the fact that people weren't allowed to live authentically before, but now we've got laws to protect them.
Yeah, and that's interesting, isn't it? Because, you're talking about here, 8th century BC, that, this was quite well documented and accepted, but only now, like Wales and Scotland, 2020, they changed the laws for same-sex marriages, which, that's a huge timeline of difference, isn't it? So this isn't something new,
No, it's not something new, but I still think we've got a long way to go
Yeah,
with it all.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So, in terms of, thinking about the future and what we have got, things to do, I'm just wondering how do we as parents, how do we approach this topic with our children? Because we don't want to come across as that we're prying or being nosy, and certainly not judgmental, because obviously if we do come across as judgmental to our children, the likelihood is that they're not going to share with us as much, are they? So help us, Catherine. What can we do in order to broach this subject with our children?
Well, typically, as you say, I wouldn't suggest going straight up to talking to them about it until they are ready. But there are subtle signs that may make them feel more comfortable around you. And I think that's the way I'd approach it. So then they don't feel that they're being kind of attacked by you.
Okay, so what would be these subtle signs that you're talking about?
Yeah, so it can be really simple things, such as kind of changing a lanyard you wear to work to incorporate the LGBTQIA plus or colours.
Okay.
So that you're conveying you're a safe person, not just to your own children, but perhaps if you work in a school, it can convey that to others as well.
And so you mentioned there about incorporating the flag or the colours. What are they?
So it's a rainbow flag typically. So anything that's got rainbow colours would be good. You can get rainbow lanyards from Amazon. Loads of places sell them. They are quite cheap, but they're easily recognisable.
Yeah.
The other thing is you can be curious alongside them. So if you're kind of on TikTok or Instagram or, Facebook, and a new term comes up, go to see them, see if they've heard the term before. Do it in a natural kind of conversation, like, oh, this has popped up. Do you know what this means, kind of thing? It can be over the dinner table, perhaps, but it just shows that you're willing to learn about the community, and that can also mean that you're a safe person.
And I think as soon as you start showing that curiosity with things like that, I think it does, like you say, it does open the table for discussion, which could then, open the lines of communication for other things that are going on in your child's life as well.
Absolutely.
Just showing that your openness and curiosity. What else could you recommend?
You could also have kind of LGBTQ plus friendly resources and books around the house.
Okay, what kind of books are they?
So you can, for, kind of transgender or gender identity, there's a book that's called Being a Super Trans Ally. That's for ages 8 to 18. That's a really good book, to be honest. Not just for individuals who might be kind of exploring this themselves, but for peers and teachers, that can be helpful. Or you've got The Gender Wheel, which is a really good book in itself as well for gender identity. Or if you're looking at the kind of sexuality aspect of it, there's a book called Yay, You're Gay, Now What? Which is a really good book in terms of kind of, it's honest and kind of raw. But what I will say is with the last book, there are aspects that are rather grown-up subjects.
Okay.
So it does talk about sex and things like that. And it talks about consent, which I think is really important. But what people have kind of rated it, parents particularly, they said that that book is beneficial due to the lack of discussion within schools during kind of sex ed and that kind of thing. It tends to be around heterosexual sex, as opposed to kind of gay sex and that kind of thing. So they have found it really beneficial in that regard.
And that's really important, isn't it? Understanding healthy relationships, safe sex and things like that is so important that we do, adapt our curriculum in schools to include, information around, homosexual relationships.
Absolutely. And I think that this book does it really well. It's kind of done in a fun way that's approachable. And I think that's what kids need.
And accepting as well, isn't it?
Absolutely. And my advice is just, if you are looking for books, just look at the reviews in order to see what people genuinely thought of them as well, because you can get a flavour for what is going to be in that book then as well. What I will say though is that some individuals can be hypervigilant because this is an area that's so important to them. So hypervigilant just means overly aware of people around them.
Okay.
So they might be aware of people doing things differently and things like that. So they may become suspicious if you suddenly turn up with all these LGBTQ plus books and things like that. So I wouldn't bombard them. Perhaps pick one or two of those kind of subtle signs and drip feed them into the kind of conversation.
Okay. So thank you. There's a few books there that parents can look at using with their children if they feel it's appropriate.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, what else can parents do to support their children?
Well, ideally, we'd kind of want to create a warm, accepting environment. For that, we need to listen to our children, recognise their feelings, accept their views as real, which can be sometimes hard when we don't really understand them ourselves. But as long as you're kind of going, well, that's real for you, so I'm alongside with you, that usually kind of makes things better. Support them in managing their feelings and invite collaboration. So a lot of time, the young people themselves have what they need. They know what they need to do. So they just need someone alongside them on this journey.
Yeah.
So just be that person.
And what do you mean by invite collaboration?
So invite collaboration is just being there alongside that person on their journey. See what they would like to do with it. If they've got any queries and things like that, let them be in control of their vessel, basically. It's not telling them this is what you should do, it's listening to them, taking on board what they want to do, as opposed to just saying this is what you need to do.
Yeah, and I think that's important for us to recognise that it's for both the gender identity and sexuality. Absolutely. We're talking here. Yeah, absolutely.
And we really need to just be aware of how gender and sexuality impacts our thoughts, feelings, and behaviours. Everyone's going to have their own view and lens on this topic. And it is quite a polarizing topic. It tends to have kind of big feelings that come with it. And what we just need to be aware of is how they make us feel, and if that's impacting the way that we are kind of interacting with our children then, and what we need to do to stop it. Is it we just need to learn more? Is it that we need to get strategies from other professionals? Is it that we need to go to clubs or parent groups? What do we need to do to make sure that it's not affecting our relationships?
Yeah. And I think that's key, isn't it? For any relationship with any child about any topic, isn't it? Absolutely. It's about having that, understanding of their needs and being, non-judgmental but unsupportive, isn't it? It's really helping them on any journey that they have in life. Because as we know, it's very difficult for our children growing up. And actually, us as parents, we can learn along the way with them,
Absolutely.
It's that shared journey. Why do you think it's important that we have these open conversations, Catherine?
I think it's important to mention here some statistics so that we can really kind of appreciate why we need to be more educated on these topics. So within the 2021 census, 262,000 people over the age of 16 answered no, indicating that their gender identity was different from the sex registered at birth. And over 1.5 million identified as a different sexual orientation to being straight and or heterosexual.
Okay, so you're saying there that 262,000 people over the age of 16 now identified as a gender different to what they were assigned to at birth. Okay.
Yeah.
That shows us there's so many individuals out there, isn't there, that are experiencing that and identifying as
Absolutely.
different.
And I think what's really important to be mindful here is that this is just over 16. We don't know the numbers for under 16, and we don't actually know if that's the correct amount of people, because obviously with the census only one person has to do it. So if they're not out to their family, so out means if they've signaled to their family that they are part of the LGBTQ plus community, then their family won't know to put it down. And there may be loads of different reasons. It could be kind of stigma, family difficulties, or just not feeling comfortable themselves for them not being out. So this isn't a fair representation. So we could expect those numbers to be quite significantly higher. Oh, absolutely. A recent UK survey, trans people in the UK noted 67% respondents avoided being open about their gender due to fears of negative reactions. So yes, I feel like it's quite a lot more. Absolutely. And can you imagine, it's 67% of people being fearful about that, to share that. That's something really challenging to live with, isn't it? Worried about that negative reaction from society. Absolutely. And I think we need to kind of mention here attribution theory. Okay, what is that? It's just kind of a psychologist's way of saying how we know what we notice about people, what they notice about their behaviours, and that how it influences how we feel about them.
Okay.
So in terms of attribution theory in this regard, a psychologist called Jovanen in 1991 found that if a child perceived a peer as different, they're more likely to be rejected. And although individuals' attributes can change, we need to know that this is something that we have to be mindful of, because if they're not changed, then it can lead to the young people feeling rejected. And as you say, we've got loads of people that we don't actually know about as well.
Yeah. And those feelings of rejection, that's really tough for our kids growing up, because as we know, it's so vitally important to them, especially as adolescents growing up, to be accepted by their peers.
Absolutely.
And to feel rejection like that, that's you can understand then why 67% of people are very fearful of that rejection, because it's a real thing, isn't it?
100%. And then if we think about kind of self-concept and self-esteem. So self-concept is the ideas we have about ourselves, including our physical and mental qualities, emotional and behavioral attributes. And there are many pieces to the kind of the self-concept puzzle, then, if you'd like to call it, which develop with age. So these can be race, appearance, culture, relationships, and then of course you've got gender and sexuality in the mix there as well.
Yeah.
Self-esteem, on the other hand, is defined as the difference between the person I'd like to be and our self-concept, or in other words, how I see myself.
Yeah.
So if I see myself as being quite similar to the person I'd like to be, then my self-esteem will be considered to be quite good. However, if there's a big difference between how I see myself and the person I'd like to be, then my self-esteem is going to be low.
Okay.
And children and young people who struggle with the how I see myself are far more likely to have low self-esteem. And two key factors that can impact that, as I said, are the gender and sexuality. And as some of you who are listening may know, low self-esteem can then harm your mental health and lead to conditions such as anxiety and depression. So not only do you have difficulties with kind of not fitting in and the rejection, but you've also got the difficulties that come from the low self-esteem then as well, which can be part and parcel, and they go hand in hand together.
Okay, so what can this cause then, when we're thinking about in terms of this low self-esteem?
So kind of research at the moment suggests that rejection at an early age can cause children to internalize that they are the problem, which can lead to them feeling the need to kind of hide their gender identity, which puts them at risk of becoming withdrawn, anxious, and unsociable at school. Individuals tend to truant school, so they kind of leave the school early and things like that, or skip school as well.
Gosh.
And 42% of LGBTQ plus school pupils have been bullied in the past year, which is double the number of non-LGBTQ plus pupils. 48% of pupils has had little to no positive messaging about being LGBTQ plus at school in the last year. Half the LGBTQ plus pupils hear homophobic slurs frequently or often at school. Transgender people face greater marginalization than their LGB peers or cisgender peers. LGBTQ plus individuals are at higher risk of violence. But it's not just rejection from peers. There can be rejection from family members as well, and this can increase risk of homelessness and impact access to kind of mental health support. And finally, this does come with a trigger warning for anyone. So if you don't want to hear it, skip forward 10 seconds even. LGBTQ plus young people are more than 4 times as likely to attempt suicide than their peers.
My gosh, Catherine, there's a lot there that shows how, this rejection, this low self-esteem, the fear of that kind of negative response from peers, but also family members, can have hugely damaging effects on our young people.
Absolutely. And I think that's why it's really important to have these kind of discussions, because I know you mentioned at the start that you're not quite sure what questions to ask and things like that.
Yeah.
But I think you need to ask these questions, because otherwise, how will we know? How can we do better?
Yeah.
We can't if we don't know the questions or the answers.
I think that's really important, isn't it? It's like, we're not going to give you here are the questions you need to ask your child. I think it's so individual to each child, and actually you as a parent, it's really important for you to be curious, open but non-judgmental. It's mentioning, right, can we have a chat about this? It's something I wanted to, share with you, maybe having those books, whatever it may be, is just that way in to start showing your openness and your support,
100%. And there are going to be things that are going to jar you because it's natural, you're only human. But it's about not showing those things to your child. Perhaps if something's jarred you, it's about recognizing, oh, that doesn't sit right with me. So why?
Yes, absolutely. It doesn't mean that it's wrong. It means something in you needs more information to be able to understand it better.
100%, yeah.
Okay, Catherine, this has been really, really helpful. I've really learned a lot today. Thank you. And I hope our parents listening have gained a lot. And it's certainly to have different ways of finding out more information as well, because like we said, things change regularly, and this is just a brief discussion about some of the issues out there. We haven't included everything because we don't have all the time, but just to be mindful, we haven't been able to include everything, and there are a lot of things out there that need further exploration. And please use the resources that we're going to put at the end of of this Tonnau Talks for where you can look for more information. I'm just thinking, in terms of our Tonnau Talk here, what would be your top tips?
Okay, I think the top tips are that we ask questions, especially if you don't understand something, such as asking individuals what their pronouns are, for example, or asking an individual what the term they use mean in order to educate yourself. In terms of pronouns typically follow the pattern of she, her, he, him, or they, them. And then that can be a really nice way of kind of opening conversations with individuals. It's about listening, recognizing their feelings, accepting their views as real, supporting them in kind of managing their feelings, inviting that collaboration. And what I've mentioned about just really being aware of how gender and sexuality impacts our thoughts, feelings, and behaviours. I think that's really important here as well.
Thank you. Wonderful. So we've come to the section where we have some questions, and I do believe we've got 2 questions from our parents. However, Catherine, I hope you don't mind, I've got some questions for you. I'm just wondering if you could dismiss one myth about gender identity or sexuality forever, what would it be?
Okay. I think that gender identity and sexuality are not additional learning needs themselves, and or they don't typically require support, because there's nothing wrong with an individual who identifies as being part of the LGBTQ plus community. Therefore, you may never need to speak to a professional, such as an educational psychologist, regarding this topic. However, due to the environmental factors, as we've discussed above, there may be times where individuals may need support, particularly if their sexuality or gender identity may be one aspect that's impacting upon their sense of belonging. So, how we fit in within a group, or their mental well-being. So it's not that we would focus on any of the aspects within the LGBTQ plus community. We'd focus on what is happening for this child that's making them have difficulties in terms of belonging or mental well-being.
Okay, thank you for that. And what would be your take-home message for our parents listening today?
I think it's important that we all remember that we all make mistakes. It's just part of being human. But it's what we learn from our mistakes that are important, and that we improve ourselves. In terms of gender identity and sexuality, I think what is the most important aspect is that you're kind of open-minded, willing to learn, and ready to apologise if you do get it wrong, and just do better next time.
Thank you. Right, just looking here now for some questions from our parents. Okay, so we have a parent that's written in. Their son is in nursery, and they're worried that their son enjoys dressing up as a princess. Is that normal, they're asking?
Oh, absolutely. At that age, children are not concerned about labels or things like that. They simply know what they like and they don't like. And to be honest, princess dresses are usually more visually appealing and more eye-catching than a lot of items, particularly boys' outfits. They tend to be quite bland. So they are navigating the world and working out who they are and what they like, and it's just nothing more than that. In fact, the BBC did a research documentary where they dress toddlers in gender-specific clothing and asked strangers to play with them. And what they found was that it was the adults that directed the children to kind of gender-specific toys, so the girls to the bears or the boys to the cars, more than what they were going to seek themselves.
Okay, so it's actually the adults that are kind of imposing this on the children, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, okay, thank you for that. I hope that's been helpful. A parent asking here, saying their child is openly come out, but they're worried about coming out to others because of the stigma. What can they do?
Well, first of all, I can't imagine what they're currently going through, but there will be some people that can and will help them. My advice would be to kind of access the links in the helpful information slide, even if it's just for the kind of Mind Out website, which is an LGBTQ plus mental health charity who provide a quick exit feature for their users to feel safe while using it. So that just means it's a button that if they press it, it goes straight to a homepage.
Okay.
So it doesn't look like they've been on this specific page.
Right. Okay.
If possible, it would be important to have a key adult. This is someone that you can feel safe with, so you don't feel alone. You don't need to disclose anything to this adult, however. And this key person could be anyone you know has been a safe adult, such as a teacher who runs the kind of LGBTQ plus club, or someone such as an emotional literacy support assistant known as ELSAs in school. They might be the best people to go to if you're kind of having worries about these things.
Okay, that's good. Thank you. And we'll put some links to some helpful websites on the slides after we finish so that people can have a look at that then after. Well, thank you very much, Catherine, for joining us today. It's been a really, really interesting topic to discuss, and I hope our parents have found it helpful, and just making everyone aware that it's an area that everyone kind of needs to be more curious about and open into learning more stuff about. As we said, this is simply just the tip of the iceberg, but I hope it's been helpful in our helping our parents to kind of start on that journey of curiosity and learning more about it, and not being afraid to discuss it with our kids. So diolch yn fawr, thank you very much. Please, again, there's the QR code on the screen if you'd like to join our live sessions that are coming up. Thank you, Dr. Catherine Edwards.
Diolch yn fawr for having me. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.